Time for a brand new edition of BWI Live. That's Thomas Frank Carr. I'm Greg Pickel from BlueWhiteIllustrated.com. The news cycle is spinning hot and heavy in late June. The official visit period is over for the time being for college football, but the dead period does not mean the news is anything but dead. Here on the Blue White Illustrated YouTube channel or over at BlueWhiteIllustrated.com or wherever you get your podcasts. We appreciate you being with us on a Wednesday, June 26th. T. Frank, as we get into today's show, there is plenty to discuss. We've been talking about it all over BlueWhiteIllustrated.com, where our subscription for you is just $1 for 2 months using code PSU1. That's code PSU1 to sign up for a special offer just for you, $1 for 2 months for the latest intel on the team. Nate Bauer just sat down with Pat Kraft. We obviously have more recruiting news than you can keep up with. But if you want to try, you can join us $1 for 2 months over at BlueWhiteIllustrated.com using code PSU1. T. Frank, it's busy, buddy. There's a lot going on in terms of decisions in the recruiting world. We have 2025 guys deciding, 2026 guys deciding. That was yesterday. We're recording on June 26th, so June 25, Penn State picks up Troy Hun, one of the top quarterbacks in the class of 2026, made for a big morning for Penn State fans, and I know many of you were following along with that. And then later in the day, the pendulum swung the other way, and Brandon Finney, a highly coveted cornerback from a school that Penn State recruits well in McDonogh, ended up picking Oregon over Penn State. The Lions, long leaders in the on-three recruiting prediction machine, T. Frank, but never had a commanding lead. And so maybe that was telling that while they were in the driver's seat, that this one could maybe get away from them at the end. It did. And so for Penn State, obviously, there's plenty of time left in terms of the flip component of all this. And you're going to hear a lot of that we already have from Penn State fans in the class of 2025 about how much time there is for Penn State to try and flip Brandon Finney from Oregon. But just let's start with your initial thoughts on that development and what it means for Penn State. And we'll get into, I guess, after the news. Certainly there's a news component to this, and then there is a class makeup component of this. And we'll start with the news.
Yeah, so I think it's a big blow for Penn State from an elite athlete going to a different school. And I think, Greg, I don't know that there is a difference between the class component and the news component, because obviously losing to Oregon for a prospect in your region, going across the country, that there's a lot of face value stuff there that I think is pretty implicitly understood. To me, the most interesting thing about this class is, both positionally and if you zoom out and look at the whole class, there are not a lot of A-plus athletes in this group. And not even A-plus. So Brandon Finney's an A-plus athlete. An athlete that you would say is elite for his position. And whether you want to give a grade to it or not, a guy that is clearly a standout player at that position from the physical makeup that has the ceiling to be, potentially down the road, one of the best at his position. Now, there's more than one way to get there, right? So, like, you can be excellent at your craft. You can get faster. I've called this the fast enough class. But when you lack that speed or you lack some aspect of that, whether it's size, height, weight, speed, I think that's the story in 2025 is a lot of these guys, you can look back at guys they've missed on. They're missing on that top tier, and these are regional guys that have then become national products. And some of them you understand. We've gone over this on the recruiting show. We'll talk about this more in detail with the experts tomorrow with Sean Fitz and Ryan Snyder. But to me, it just looks like certain prospects that should go to Penn State, from all the ways it fits and makes sense, they aren't. And you have to ask the question, because we don't know the answer out loud, how much does NIL affect these decisions? And where is Penn State falling behind? And it just feels like the top has been lopped off of what Penn State's been used to getting recently and over the last couple of years. And I find that to be telling. And, you know, not to hit a panic button, not to say this is the new normal, but if NIL or these other factors continue and this trend continues, I think what everyone thinks Penn State is in their negative brain, that everyone who says Penn State doesn't get five-star athletes and they don't get elite athletes, there's now a path where that's true. And I think that is something you have to be aware of when you're looking at some of these conversations about really good prospects that are athletically check all the boxes. And there's been a lot of them that have gone to other programs. Zaire Addison went to Oregon. So that's what sticks out to me about this. It's not necessarily the one loss. It's not the individual player. It's the trend that I've seen in this class particularly.
Yeah, no doubt about it, T. Frank. And sometimes I don't know if it's fair to use it as a verb, but we will. You're going to get Oregon, right? I mean, you just are, whether it's NIL, whether it's facilities with what Phil Knight has out there and Nike from a money perspective. Sometimes it's going to happen. Not saying that was the sole reason Brandon Finney ended up at Oregon, but I think you'd be ignorant to not at least think that played at least some role in the Ducks landing him. As someone mentions in the chat, this is not the first time this has happened. Tysier Denmark was an Oregon commit, ended up at Penn State, recently arrived in the class of 2024. Class of 2024. Yes, this gets confusing this time of year when you have 2024 enrollees, 2025 commits, and then 2026 commits. It gets a little confusing. T. Frank, do we have a super chat we got to get to? I think we might.
We can get to this one from C. Paul King. I don't know exactly what you mean about that, though. What about the O lineman in the class of 2025? Can you be more specific? He donates to the channel here, and we always appreciate super chats. We always make sure we get to your questions, your comments. But I could go about 7 different ways with what about the O-lineman in the class of 2025. Technically, there's just 2 in the class right now with Troutman and with Owen Alcini, who, we haven't talked about them almost at all in the conversation about this particular class. Now, if you're saying, are those guys elite athletes? I think that might be fair. There are guys in the class that project that way, and that's going to be kind of what we talk about later on when we talk about some of the wild cards in this class. But there are no. I think we got used to, and I say we, and I mean me, got used to Javen Williams and some of those really standout athletes that you see. It's obvious. Garrett Sexton and Egan Boyer. It's obvious they move at a different pace. There aren't guys like that in this particular class because the Michael Carrolls of the world went elsewhere. Now, Malachi Goodman's still out there. So there's players that can save this conversation to a certain degree, but they're not in the class yet. And Brandon Finney was just another one of those in the list of players that chose to go somewhere else this year. But Owen Alcini's interesting. I think he can fit that designation for sure. It just becomes the number of them in this class so far.
Yeah, there's no question about it. I think that's when ultimately we have time to see this group and what they do development-wise as seniors and see what their tape looks like and changes they make to their body, things like that. But no, there's no question. From an overall perspective, that's sort of the feeling right now. And to your point, just to wrap up this offensive line bit, and then we'll get back on track. But to me, if you look at the offensive line rankings at On3, whether it's the industry rankings that combine the various sites or just On3's rankings themselves, check out where a lot of the top players are from. It's not around here. And so I think that's a component as well. And then you mentioned a guy like Michael Carroll. Will Black's another, 2 regional guys. So, I mean, I think it's just a combination of those 2 things, and we'll see what Penn State can do. Phil Troutwine, of course, still pushing there as well. So, T. Frank, getting back to the conversation we were on, though, I think that when you look at what the Finney miss at the moment means, I hate to get too far again, but as we talk about, we say miss on June 26th, and that could look a whole lot different on December 26th.
There's a bunch of people in the chat that definitely don't believe this is sticking forever. Robert says Finney will do 1 year at Oregon and 3 at Penn State. And then Matt says we're able to get Tysier Denmark back, still have a chance there. Denmark, I think, was a more unique situation where there were some outside factors beyond his particular skill set in the Oregon conversation. But it is a fair point to make that it, as Fitz has said, when you get closer to signing day, those miles start to add up of how far away a school is for you.
Yes, there's no doubt about it. And that can sometimes impact Penn State in the reverse as well. I think we sometimes forget about that when looking at where some of its commitments are from. Certainly it can work in both directions. T. Frank, just to hit on, I guess if you want to dive into, if you have any names you're interested in from the group of remaining players, rather, that Penn State can target with Finney out of the equation, at least for the moment. But just your general thoughts there as we get into the next part of this conversation, which is always, where does the ball turn to next?
Yeah, so I don't want to spell doom and gloom here. And I guess that's the main thing, is it's never over, because people in the chat are saying Brandon Finney's going to be a Nittany Lion at some point, and you can have that optimism. But there are tangible things right in front of you that can help the situation. And that's really kind of the conversation of they need to land some of these guys. I think it's getting to a point it's a have to, especially at receiver. But just to change the profile of the class, add a little bit of that in, Lex Cyrus is a great athlete. Now, if we're talking about complete height, weight, speed, et cetera, he might not have the size, but his speed is so overwhelming. I would put him in that category of here's an A+ at the position of receiver, where you don't have to be overwhelming in every category if you've got unique traits that can put you above the rest of the class. And by the way, it's funny that everyone is complaining in the chat, or I shouldn't say in this particular chat, but in the message board and especially over on the YouTube comment section, that there are no receivers in this class. One of the guys you could say is an elite level athlete is Lyric Samuel, who is 6'4" and runs a 4.53. So that combination of size and speed, that plays at the next level. There's a lot of things to work out there, but the receiver class could be the saving grace when it comes to the athleticism portion of this class, which would just be hilarious, Greg. That would be the funniest thing if all of the other positions, Max Granville's in the class. That's an obvious win for Penn State. But if you got Matthew Otten and Lex Cyrus to join this class, and those are two guys that have a great combination of athletic traits, and then receiver comes through, I mean, it would be the answer everyone's looking for that's a Penn State fan, right. I think.
Yeah, there's no question about it. And then you dive into the obvious possibilities of what the portal could look like. Yeah, Joe, you're right. Jeff Exeter, the receiver, as we talk about receivers, he's set to decide 7 p.m. Friday night, Maryland and Virginia Tech, his other finalist he announced on Tuesday, June 25th. So as we talk on June 26th, T. Frank, we're looking out to see what he might do Friday evening as well. But yeah, you mentioned Lex Cyrus. You would assume closing in on a commitment here sooner rather than later. It's just an interesting time of year because you guys, all of you watching have noticed, whether you just here on the channel, whether you're listening to podcasts, or hopefully doing both of those and then joining us at bluewhiteillustrated.com. But I mean, these things pop up at this time of year almost every day. And in some cases, it's twice a day where dominoes start to fall elsewhere. And it makes guys maybe who wanted to wait a little bit longer decide sooner. You may have thought to yourself, I'm deciding July 10th because that's my mom's birthday. Or I'm going to decide July 26th because that's my dad's birthday or grandma's birthday. Whatever special occasion might be in a prospect's life. And then you start seeing guys commit elsewhere and you're like, are my spots as safe as I thought they were? And for the guys we're talking about, yes, the answer is almost always yes. Not so much at quarterback, but at other positions, usually that's the case. But still, this stuff all moves so fast. So when you talk about the outlook of the class, it can change on a dime in good ways and bad. And we just saw that happen on June 25th. And we're going to see it happen more as guys like Cyrus and others start to get close to decisions.
Can I add one more comment? Because I mentioned that it's the class-wide and dove right into that thought because I think that's the most important thing. But there's a positional aspect to this, too, with Brandon Finney choosing to go to Oregon. And this is kind of a champagne problem, I think, for Terry Smith, and for Anthony Poindexter as well, where you've got two really good cornerbacks in this class. And this always comes off the wrong way, but the conversation about prospects is we feel confident about these things, and there's other things that factor into whether or not a player is going to work out. There's so many different variables. So what do we know? What's the hard information? Well, there's one common theme between Jameer Joseph and Darius Dixon is that they're good. They got good size, excellent football players, questions about speed. And I think Jameer Joseph, I feel confident can play outside corner. He's got enough versatility and athleticism traits in his tool bag. And truly the same thing about Darius Dixon. But again, that A+ athlete at corner is what everybody wants, which is why you have Brandon Finney going from a McDonogh recruit who's a regional player to South Carolina, Alabama, Oregon, Ohio State, all these schools wanting a guy who's 6'2" and runs and moves that way. So you don't, in my mind, have a guy who's a lock from a physical traits perspective to play outside corner. Now, that doesn't mean that those variables can work out in Penn State's favor, where both of their corners in this class work out. And I think that's where the positivity, I want to stress that. Both of these guys can play outside corner. They can work. But if you're talking about a guy who reaches all the potential and gives you the flexibility of, okay, if things aren't working out perfectly, do either of those guys need to play the lion? Do either of those guys need to move to a field safety position? That flexibility within this particular class, forget what's already on the roster, is important, I think, to maintain and truly take the next step at the position for corner for Penn State. And so you don't get that now. And I just think it's a missed opportunity, but it is not a game breaker for Penn State, and it kind of continues a larger trend in the class.
Right. There's no doubt about it. And of course, the flip side of this conversation is if you wanted to not worry about one position in terms of this very conversation, because it usually works itself out, quarterback would be it, right? I mean, if Daquan Hardy, Johnny Dixon, and now some of the stuff you're talking about is what those guys brought to the table as maybe not overly heralded recruits. And then they get in here with Chuck Losey and that time Dwight Galt and Terry Smith and like that, and things take off from there. But yeah, the overarching point is certainly there for what this class may be lacking. But yeah, cornerback's one I just have a hard time getting worked up over. I think don't get me wrong, it doesn't excuse a miss on Brandon Finney, which is a miss and a painful one without question. Yeah. But it's one position, at least to me, where you can acknowledge those things as facts and also maybe not get too far down the tracks of being worked up over it, while also realizing that guys like that, there's a reason so many programs like Penn State one of them, and they usually make your life a heck of a lot easier when it comes time to train and mold them. There's no question.
Yeah, and this comes in the chat here from, I apologize, I'm toggling a bunch of everything. Jim and Margaret DeBarndini says Joey Porter Jr. had questions about speed. No, and that's a fair point. That's what I'm saying is you can win at corner. Now the difference is Joey had a unique skill where he had 34-inch arms, which is bizarro world length. So that physicality, literally being able to stay balanced over the balls of your feet and not be reaching and lunging forward because you can just reach out with Inspector Gadget arms. That's a weapon you can use. And that's one of those reasons why he was so dominant once he learned to play with his feet and learned how to, kind of do all the things at the position. The guys in this class, they're good, but nobody has Joey Porter Jr. length. So again, Brandon Finney, nobody has Brandon Finney's speed. When you have these unique characteristics that make you stand out, that's part of the conversation as well. So you've got a bunch of very good corner prospects who are B+ at everything, but do they have unique skill sets? And I think that's kind of this class in a nutshell, is these are all very good football players. We get down on some of these guys because they don't have those unique skill sets, or they're a 3-star in Braswell Thomas, and people are going to dismiss that even though he's got some unique skills of his own. So it's just that combination that I think is painting the picture of this particular year for Penn State.
Yep, there's no doubt about it. You're listening to a new edition of BWI Live. It's June 26th. That's Thomas Frank Carr. I'm Greg Pickel. T. Frank, let's get into some different news of the day. There are two pretty big changes out of the NCAA this week. I think the second part of the conversation, we want to start there, or do you just want to knock out the recruiting calendar part, and then we'll dive into the staff side changes? You tell
Dealer's
me.
choice. I'm going to lean on you for this as our reporter anyway, so you take it away here.
Yeah, let's start with the staff side changes since you have that graphic up for those watching on YouTube. So at this point, the NCAA Division I Council is on the verge, actually has, I guess they still need to do maybe a couple button clicks or whatever you do in 2024 to make things official with bylaws and things like that. But basically staff sizes are going to be unlimited. Now, you still will have to designate your off-campus recruiters. That is not changing. It's still 10 coaches plus 10 people from your program is the best way to describe it now, plus your head coach. But the head coach can designate who he wants to go out. And an example where you might switch things up there is maybe at some point during the calendar year, Charles Walker, who works very closely with Jaywan Sider as the running backs analyst, maybe he goes on the road to recruit for a bit and Jaywan stays back and does whatever he might
change it up.
Need in state college. Yes. Yep.
Okay. Yeah, so, that's a huge advantage for coaches who want to coach their team.
Right. So it's going to change a lot. I think there's a number of things. Obviously, the biggest one we've talked about it ad nauseum is that once analysts are allowed to coach, and if you feel like you've heard this being discussed before, it was up for approval last year. It was expected to be approved. It was not approved. So it came back up this year. It was approved. But if you remember Penn State moving Danny O'Brien from analyst to graduate assistant to be hands-on with the quarterback, it was a move in reaction to concern that this wouldn't get passed again this year. And so that's why Penn State made the switch it did, so that Danny O'Brien can be its quarterback guy. Moving forward, he could do that from an analyst role. And so that's why Penn State made a change this year. But in terms of the long-term impact on Penn State, it could change how his role in the program is defined after this season.
Yeah.
Other guys, the same thing. And so, Frank, it really alters, I think, the college football landscape. Our graduate assistant is going to be a thing anymore. We'll have to wait and see. But ultimately, there's a reason, and I'll stop rambling after this, but there's a reason coaches, including James Franklin, have long been trying to do what Nick Saban did at Alabama and build up this massive off-field support staff. And there's a lot of reasons for it, not just being able to coach on field, but certainly having those guys available for practice and game help is not going to hurt anyone or anything.
Yeah, and I think it provides stability, right? Because you can have the same conversation about Deion Barnes. Rewind 2 years ago, and we're having the same conversation. How does Penn State keep a critical part of their staff who had become such a valuable asset on the recruiting trail, and graduate assistants can only make so much money, I assume, right? I think that's also part of it, where they have to be enrolled in college credits. There's a lot of caveats that go with a graduate assistant for a guy who's probably getting closer to 30 than he is, a guy who maybe doesn't fit the I just graduated college, I want to get into coaching, et cetera, trying to bend those rules to get the best possible staff together. Now, I think it provides a better opportunity for these guys, and I'm not trying to like play a violin for Danny O'Brien or Deion Barnes and how much money they make, but it's not I would imagine it wasn't commensurate with the amount of effort and work they were putting into their jobs in order to get the product you see on the field. So I think there's a lot of life benefits to some of these guys who are on the staff but not the position coaches proper. And then it also brings it into line more with what the NFL does, right? Where you have assistant coaches at certain positions, where your primary position coach and then your assistant coach. So how does this affect Torrance Brown, right? How does this affect a couple other guys that are in similar situations? And then I guess the question to you is, who does this benefit the most in college football? Forget Penn State. Again, zoom the lens out, look at the whole landscape. Is Penn State on the list of universities that can take advantage of this, do you think, Greg?
Yeah, I don't think there's any question. I mean, I think when you go back to some of James Franklin's comments that were made when he got the contract extension that he got, is, part of that was not money for himself, but money for his salary pool for assistant coaches. That was on-field guys. That was analyst roles. I don't have the numbers in front of me, but I'd be willing to bet that, well, certainly they've at least doubled in terms of number of analysts. At least, I would think, probably go back as far as 2018, the numbers at least doubled, if not tripled. If you go back and look through the various media guides online and how many support staffers Penn State listed, even as recently as like 2019 and 2020 compared to now, it's a big difference. So I don't think there's any question that Penn State's a school that would be able to take advantage of it. The key is just going to be, at what point do you have too many cooks in the kitchen, and at what point do you have enough? I mean, if you look across like the Georgia and Alabama, and all these things are online, you can go look them up, but go look at like the Alabama staff list, the Georgia staff list. They are enormous. And, I think that's part of it too. And then the flip side of this is just, I think you were getting to this, but it's the money part. Like, before, and this could still be the case, but like analyst jobs were great because you could take in a lot of cases, not every case, but in a lot of cases, you would take the buyout from a school that fired you and maybe you make a little bit at the school you were going to, but mostly your salary was being paid by a different school, and you were just sitting in the back breaking down film, doing all this stuff. And I think this might
doing the
change
fun
that.
stuff.
Right. Dude, I think that might change this a little bit, but I think that's the 1,000 or 10, 20, whatever 1,000-foot view of college football. But for Penn State itself, Frank, I can't believe we got this far without bringing it up. And I'm checking the comments just to be sure. But this is the rule that everyone's been waiting for Dan Connor.
That's why he was on the graphic.
Of the Penn State football family. Yes, that's right. And no one mentioned it in the comments, which is extremely disappointing. But, for a long time, Penn State fans have wondered if he's a guy that would be the most impactful, moving from an analyst that can only do off-the-field stuff to one that can do stuff on the field. And it's no question about it. Both as a recruiter and as an on-field guy. So this isn't, and we'll have a story up on BlueWhiteIllustrated.com. I'm ranking the top analysts that this impacts the most for the Penn State staff, both them and for the program. And Dan Connor leads the list for obvious reasons, but he's not going to just replace Tom Allen as the linebacker coach. Let's be clear about that.
He might replace Justin Lustig. That just popped in my head.
As the outside linebackers coach. Yes, right. So, all those fun titles they hand out. So, I mean, I think that the key here is just simply realizing that guys that you have on your staff, some of them are just film savants, and you don't necessarily need them on the field doing stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, some of them are just complete film wizards and breakdowns for this, that, and the other thing, and they're brilliant in that way. Some of them, though, T. Frank, as you know, are very either accomplished players and or position coaches or coordinators in the case of Rob Smith that you can find lots of different uses for on game day and on the practice field.
So
and think
there's
about
a couple
the young guys too. The young guys is the other thing that comes to mind. How much work you can get them with more hands-on people who might be able to get your 3s and 4s more work than they might otherwise would during a normal practice.
So there's a couple of things here from a football perspective, because I feel like that might be where I can contribute to this particular conversation. So much of football is predicting what your opponent is going to do and being right about it. You know, having the right insight. And James Franklin talks about chasing ghosts. After a certain point, you're adding too many variables into your own mind, so you don't have a clear picture. So when you're trying to diagnose what UCLA wants to do on 3rd and 7, what is the top play they call? What's the formation they call it from? What are some of those tells that we can understand from a schematic standpoint? It's on the players to do their own film study and to understand, so they fully have a picture of, you know, you always love the idea of the tells. Like, okay, so he's on his toes when he's a half a yard back when he's going to pull, and I know that's when we've got to be on alert for their pin and pull scheme, blah, blah, blah. But if you've got coaches who are responsible for the film breakdown and the analytics of understanding all of those things, then Jaywan Sider can coach running backs. It's the division of labor to understand we want to develop players, we want to develop a game plan. Tom Allen has more opportunity than brain space to think about what the defensive scheme should be that week, what they should employ, and allowing for those neurons to fire, to have the ideas that go together to create a successful game plan, because you aren't overloaded with all these other things. Now, yeah, if you're the defensive coordinator, you're the running backs coach, you're the head coach, you got to be involved in all of it. But are you majoring in all of it? Or is there somebody who is, as you said, a film savant that's saying, hey, I noticed these patterns. This is what we can predict, this is what we can expect, and this is how we, you know, and then you can go about developing the plan to counter or then to attack those things. So I think these guys are used to doing all of that already. Andy Kotelnicki's used to doing all of this stuff.
Right.
Is the efficiency better? And it's not just about like their quality of life, et cetera, but is the ability to win, and that's the end result here, is that increased by allowing these staff sizes to change? And can Penn State take advantage of this opportunity because of the minds they have on the staff? Not just because of, you know, the influx of coaches on the field, because as you said, too many cooks in the kitchen is also a bad thing. But how do you align everybody to be in the right position to succeed now that you have these opportunities?
Yeah, and I think that's one thing James Franklin has done a nice job of. He has a mix of analysts on his staff that you have guys like Rob Smith, who's a former defensive coordinator. You have somebody like Jeff McElherney, I believe it's pronounced. It was just recently a position coach. You have Vic Hall, who comes in from the MAC as a position coach. You have some younger guys on staff. You have Bill Quizzert, who came here with Andy Kotelnicki from Kansas, and Thomas Allen. Of course, Tom Allen's son came with him from Indiana. So you kind of have all these mix of guys who have been doing it before with the current coordinator, guys that have been doing it on their own and now can offer insight, and then younger guys who are really good maybe at the film part of it, breaking things down. So to me, I think the setup is right. And one area where I think you're going to see this jump, there's a school, I want to say it's not Texas, it might be Oklahoma State. I think it's Oklahoma State, who they actually had an analyst already, like, basically dedicated as a special teams coordinator. Even they didn't have a special teams coordinator. He was the guy. He just couldn't be the guy. He can now, but he couldn't before.
Yeah.
But I think special teams is the area where you're going to see this impact things probably the most, just because you want as many minds on that as possible, but what is it detracting from? And so the more people that are on your support staff that you can throw at that, the more time Justin Lustig may have to come up with some other ideas related to that. So, yeah, go ahead, T. Frank.
Yeah. Before we get on to the next topic, there's a thread in the chat that's going on that I want to address, and I just think that I don't know if these people live in State College, so I just want to address this. Josh brings up the point. He says Penn State University, State College in Center County need to build a larger airport with more access to large metropolitan areas. Then A.G. Duke says he was on a plane, a puddle jumper that had problems where they had to distribute the weight more properly, et cetera, et cetera. It's not. Why would you build a larger airport in State College?
Right.
What is here that commands year-round, 365 days a year, not 7 weeks out of the fall, commands an airport with multiple terminals? They have an empty terminal right now because it's not just the size of the airport, it's the traffic. So State College is what it is. There are not large businesses that operate out of State College, or enough of them to create a metropolitan area to then have an airport. Like you're looking at this the wrong way. And as somebody who likes to live in the woods, I'm fine with it. It is a roadblock for the university, but as a resident of Center County for the last 10 to 18 years, I'm fine with it. That's a total aside.
It's the endless give and take, and I think I'm not sure. Look, I think for all the reasons you just outlined, a bigger airport's probably not coming to State College, but could you work with the airlines to get better access to some different hubs that may ease the ability for people to fly in from outside the region more frequently or something like that? I think that's your option. If you're trying to do something, it's probably not build a bigger airport. It's try to find a way to get more things in and out of State College. But again, the traffic is part of the issue. So no, it's always been a conversation. It's been talked about ad nauseum by us, by James Franklin, by recruits, by people before, James Franklin took over. I mean, it's at times not an easy place to get to. I mean, I listen to, obviously sometimes recruits, but more so the people who are either opposing fans or that cover an opposing team for a different media outlet, and the things they have to do to get to State College in a somewhat economical way. It's tough. Yeah. And there's some Big Ten cities that are just like that too. I don't know how many of you have ever tried to get to West Lafayette. Not a terribly easy place to get to. Madison, Wisconsin, depending on what you want to spend, it can be hit or miss. Champaign, Illinois, same thing. Iowa City can kind of be the same thing. So it just is what it is in the Big Ten. And, Penn State is certainly, I'm sure, trying to find ways to improve that situation, not just for football recruits and the football program, but for anyone that may feel that way. But I'm not sure building a bigger airport is going to solve all the
now
woes
we're on to Airbnb. We're on to Airbnbs and hotels in the chat. And again, not to make this about me, but try buying a house here with the amount of people that buy houses for vacation homes or for 7 times a year. It's a unique market, and there's a bunch of challenges you outlined correctly because people buy those houses just to rent out, and it's crazy the amount of that they'll charge for those Verbos and Airbnbs. You can almost make a mortgage payment for half the year just on football weekends alone and graduation, etc. So there are challenges for Penn State to get their recruits and their athletes in here and their fans at times.
Yeah, there's no doubt about it. And at some point, it does become a 7-month. I mean, we've heard this talked about before as well. It does become a 7-month a year or 7 home games a year kind of economy. It doesn't become, it is. And so to go back to, why don't we just do a site promo and just tie all this together neatly before we move on? But over at bluewhiteillustrated.com, you can join us on the special offer. You're not going to get it any better. It is $1 for 2 months of access to all kinds of Penn State intel, news, recruiting updates, team news, using code PSU1 at bluewhiteillustrated.com. $1 for 2 months. Nate Bauer recently sat down with Penn State Athletic Director Pat Kraft, and where I'm going with this is the first part of the series, which just published about a half hour ago when today's show started on June 26th, looks at the avenues Penn State could have went down beside the one that it did, and looked at some of the reasons that it did not. But so you would check that out over its exclusive content. That's easy for me to say over at bluewhiteillustrated.com, where it is $1 for 2 months of access, signing up using the promo code PSU1. But the reason I bring that up is that all the stuff going on at Beaver Stadium, and the reason they picked the way that they are going to renovate it and things like that is to ensure that in the future there are more revenue streams for Beaver Stadium than just the 7 home games. Well, who else is that revenue for? The State College economy. And so if as soon as you get moving on that and you get that into place, you have an opportunity to maybe make some adjustments to the way things operate based on the cash flow annually. and year over year, and at different times of the month. So, or I'm sorry, of the year. So,
Yeah.
it all ties together. There's no doubt. And I hear you on the frustrations with hotels and VRBOs and Airbnbs and the prices and how you can get into State College, whether it's by car, whether it's by plane. Things like that. Yeah, the football program should build a hotel. This is from Ryan. Hope I'm getting this right. Is it Sheared? I hope. If not, let us know. But build a hotel specifically for players' families. They should have free stays on game weekends. I don't disagree with sentence 2 at all. I think that would be great.
Yeah.
And they do find some ways to make families, comfortable and get them here the best way they can. But for the other part, in terms of building a hotel, I think you would want to build player dorms first before you worried about player, unless you were somehow building both. If you could build like half of that be for players and athletes, and then half of it be for guests on the weekend. But again, when you talk about building just football specific stuff, you can run into any number of issues across campus. So all told, yes, there were a lot of great ideas in terms of things that if money and land space and all of that were not a factor, that would help Penn State in recruiting. There's no doubt about it. But there's also a lot of limitations for a variety of reasons that some of this stuff, which sounds like a great idea. I mean, look, Ryan, I think it's a fantastic idea. I'm just not sure in reality if it's an avenue anyone can go down for a variety of reasons, not just money, not just land space, but when you get into Title IX and all the money that schools are now going to have to spend with revenue sharing and things like that, it just becomes a whole different ball game. So we shall see, but ultimately, again, I agree with everybody in the chat, T. Frank, before we move on to the recruiting calendar. It's just there's a lot of great ideas, and I'm sure there's a lot that have been talked about in the Lash building that have not necessarily come up, here, either on the show or at bluewhiteillustrated.com or in the chat. But there's a variety of reasons why even the ones that sound the best may not work. So let's get into some other news from the NCAA this week. The recruiting calendar has been altered, T. Frank. I'll let you kind of take it and run with wherever you want to go direction-wise. But certainly, I don't think it's the biggest change that could have happened, because adding a June signing day would have been the big change to the recruiting calendar. That did not pass, as you've heard Ryan and Sean talk about. That as a possibility in the past, but there are some changes to dive into.
Yeah, and so we're going to get into this at some point on the recruiting show with the experts, but these are some big changes, with the staff size and this, and I just wanted to talk about it today so that we had it on record that these things came up, and we discussed it here on the show. I'm not as well versed in these things, but I just a couple of things that I want to point out, and it says it right in the text here from Pete Nakos, who's an On3 national reporter. He says, extend the July dead period 31 calendar days beginning July 1, intended to allow coaches to prepare for the upcoming season. So to me, that's a big deal. It's never going to be like there's always going to be something going on with recruiting when somebody says, hey, I just got an offer from blank collective. Can you match? So you're still dealing with it. But as far as the way the calendar operates, it allows them, to prepare for training camp. And then the other one that I think is, and I don't know the difference, and this is why we need Ryan and Fitz to talk about this, adding a December quiet period intended to allow teams to focus on football postseason and allow on-campus recruiting activities. So I think that means they can't go out on the road to recruit.
Right, yes. But you can host players from the portal. Yes, but you can host portal guys if that's going on. You can host guys right before December signing day. So, you guys can get into more of that tomorrow, T. Frank. But that is another change that was made to the NCAA recruiting calendar. And as we all know, there's more rule changes coming down the pike. So another day for those, though. Let's get into the wild cards in the current class, T. Frank, that we talk about guys who this isn't the class of 2025. Guys who could make a difference, and as you put, flip this Penn State class on its head. I'm going to open the bidding where you opened it on the rundown. Let's start with Brady O'Hara. Why does he make the list?
Yeah, so again, we talk about this class and kind of its personality and the way it's made up. And I think for as much as 2022 gets all of the credit for being this very, very star-heavy class that is going to make or break the 2024 season, the last couple classes have had guys that were exceptional in some way or another. Massive frames last year. And 23, I think, complemented 22 in a really good way, where you got some trench help, where you had some of those star position players. This class in particular, it's built of wild cards and undervalued players. And that's where I wanted to get into is which ones of this group defy the normal conversation. And Brady O'Hara is the latest in a trend of Penn State looking for a guy with a great frame, has the size and the athleticism to play tackle either side of the ball, if we want to include Micah Barnwell in this conversation from previous classes, who doesn't currently play that position. And getting to know the situation with Brady a little bit better this offseason, I understand the position he's in, and I understand Penn State fans' frustration with that current situation because he's 6'6". He runs a 4.9. He is an offensive tackle prospect. But for North Catholic, he's going to play tight end this year. So he's not currently working on building his body in the same way that some of these other guys have done in the past. And again, he cares about football. He loves football. He wants to be good. So he's coming up to these prospect camps and he's working with Phil Troutwine on that positional understanding. But when he was at the first prospect camp where he worked out with the offensive line, it was literally his first snap taking pass pro snaps. So you see the warts and you see, that's why I struggle with, I want to provide highlights, but not every highlight's going to be positive when we go to these camps. And there's got to be an understanding that these guys have to have the room and the grace to get better. And in our snap judgments and in our feelings, you see bad reps from a guy who is Penn State's second offensive tackle in the class from a realistic point, even if he's listed as an athlete, and you go, this isn't going to work. And it's like, well, it's literally play one. We have no idea where this is going to end. So he's an absolute wild card because that process is going to start at a point to be determined later from a physical standpoint, and he is just beginning the journey as an offensive tackle. I'm not telling you it's going to work. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is, if you say it's not going to work, you also don't know that to be true. Nobody knows. He's Schrodinger's offensive lineman at this point. He could be great, he could be not. It's just that we don't know yet. So that's why I wanted to put him number one, because I think from a positional standpoint and from a body type standpoint, he is the biggest wild card of somebody who could develop into a great offensive tackle prospect. That's why he's in the class. Penn State sees that in his talent. But there's a long way to go, longer than some of these other guys who have project next to their name in the class of, previous classes. There's so much more to go for Brady O'Hara at this point.
Yeah, since we're just coming off the official visit stretch here where some guys were on campus as commits, some were not, but have since committed. Just to answer a question in the chat quick from AG Duke 335. It says, when these highly touted recruits come to Penn State for a visit, who picks up the tab? The official visits are paid for by the school. The unofficial visits are paid for by the recruit themselves. So, look, it's 2024. I'm not naive enough to think that there aren't schools out there, collectives out there, whatever, helping fund unofficial visits. To me, there's no chance that's not happening. But from a rules perspective, officials taken care of by the school, unofficials by the player themselves. So let's move on your list of Penn State wildcards here as we talk about more commits who were recently on campus. Deshaun Burnett pops up here. Penn State commit since February 7th of this year, rated as a 4-star in the On3 industry rankings. Pittsburgh prospect T. Frank is ranked as a linebacker, 6'3", 215. Could be an edge guy. Why does he make the list?
What is he? Is he a linebacker? Is he an edge defender? And the makeup of this class is just super interesting right now. So let's start with his positional skills. Watching him at Imani Christian, you see the highlights here, but generally watching the full game film, he was a man between two positions where he played some edge rusher, he played some box linebacker. There's good things about both, but what is he? Just like Brady O'Hara, there's a firmer understanding because he's played the positions he's going to play at Penn State. I think he's an edge rusher. My inclination would be that Penn State also thinks he's an edge rusher eventually. But then he comes to a 7-on-7 tournament with Imani Christian and plays linebacker and doesn't go to the big man challenge. Now, there could be reasons for that. Like, I don't know if Imani Christian had a big man challenge team at that particular event. And maybe he wanted to play with his team. We don't have to make every single thing meaningful, but every single thing is information. So again, you're seeing him drop in coverage. I think it looks good when he does it. Is he an elite athlete for that linebacker position? No. Is he a pure edge rusher? Also not really. Like, he has developed physically to the point that he's got enough length. But if you look at this class, and again, looking at how he fits into the broader picture, They have Max Granville, who was also listed as a linebacker in the On3 industry rankings. He's going to play edge rusher for Penn State. He's a versatile sort of player himself. They have Cortez Harris, who's 6'2", 200, who's smaller than Dejon Burnett. Seeing Burnett in person, he's built like an edge rusher, but they now only have one linebacker. So where does he fit in this class? If Penn State wants to add more edge rushers, do they keep him at linebacker until later and then decide to move him at that point? So I think these first two guys are absolute wild cards on the roster as to where they end up, not where they end up positionally with Brady O'Hara, but there's not a clear read of what they are from their high school film or really from their physical makeup with Burnett. And I just think that's a huge wild card because does he play Mike? He's faster than a guy like Zariah Fisher, who was a guy that was destined to play defensive end in high school, but gave it a go at linebacker. So somebody asked me this yesterday in the show, in the mailbag. I don't know. I don't know what Dejon Burnett is with all those factors included. And I think that's a wild card where he could fit in at defensive end. And then they've got three of not the same guy, but similar guys. And then he could be at linebacker and he could be a guy that eventually moves to edge defender. I don't have a clear read on that. And he's a total wild card from that perspective.
Next up on the list, T. Frank, in our list of your list rather, wild cards in this class is running back Keandre Barker, 3-star out of Arkansas. Running back, one of three in this class as we talk on June 26th. Why does he make your list?
Well, all three of them could make the list at this point, but
right.
Because he hasn't played football in a year, and this is just the modern NIL landscape extends into high school as well. And I don't know, I don't want to say that this is specifically NIL related because I don't actually think it is. But he tried to transfer into the Woodlands. Ryan, who's in the chat, he lives in the Woodlands. Did some great initial sourcing on the information about this story before we went to Keandre for the specifics. But he was ineligible last year to play. So he moved to Texas from Arkansas, can't play, tried to move down to Miami Central with Beckham Kritza, and then decided to move back to Arkansas to his original high school. I think that's the situation. So the other two guys that we've talked about, we don't necessarily know what their positions are. We don't know what their development curve is. I literally don't know what Keandre Barker has become since his sophomore highlights, which you see here on film, on the YouTube channel. There's no information. So if we don't, at a position like running back, where it's athlete first, corner, edge defender, running back, these are athlete first positions that you can play if some of the other guys aren't elite athletes in this class at running back. But if that's what I looked at him as somebody who committed as a sophomore. Does he have that? How has he grown? He's 6 feet tall, according to the On3 rankings. Is he a 4.4 guy? Is he developing good instincts to hit the hole and to bounce and all those things? It's just there's no information on what he has developed into, and we'll see in the fall whether or not he's a guy that Penn State bet on early and if that bet has paid off. Because that was my initial reaction is if he's so good that they take his commitment as a sophomore, they must think he's going to be a great athlete. And then there was no information about that progress last year.
Right, and that's a great reason to have him on this list because, as you point out, we just don't know at this point in time. So Penn State will have to keep an eye on that, as we will here at BlueWhiteIllustrated.com. T. Frank, last guy on the list that we're going to talk about today. We saved quarterback for last. Yes, we know all of you listening would have preferred if we let off with quarterback because that is the position, of course, everyone talks about most. But let's hit on Beckham Kritza, the Penn State quarterback commit in the class of 2025. He's on your list of wild cards. Why?
Because he has the biggest swing from floor to ceiling. Right now, somebody said he looks like Slender Man. He is 6'5" with a big frame. So you can be 6'5" and have short arms and whatever. He's got a big frame. He could be 230. I think he's a little narrow for that maybe, but he could be a full-fledged guy. As you see, he moves well. He could be somebody that is a scrambler with a strong arm. He has got a whip. So there's a lot of the raw tools there are as good as anyone Penn State was recruiting. But what he is right now is an undersized guy that has some leak in his power. He doesn't have consistent footwork or mechanics. So when he's on, it is beautiful. And I completely understand why Penn State would have taken his commitment because the upside and the raw tools make him on a talent level comparable to Drew Aller in terms of height, weight, speed, ability, arm strength, all that stuff. But it's all the other things that he's working on in between the floor and the ceiling that are going to determine who he is and what he is. And so it's an absolute wild card if you got a guy who you think can be a program-defining quarterback from a traits perspective, but he's got so much room to grow, literally and figuratively. And the last thing is, kind of like Barker, he's transferred a bunch of times. So his film last year where he was at Miami Central, I think it was, and then during the season, during the season, he transfers and then goes and starts in Colorado. I initially was like, he doesn't know the offense. How can he be the starter and not know the offense? He's playing off script. He's playing backyard football. Well, it makes sense, seeing as he wasn't there for training camp. So, there is a lot to know about Beckham Kritza this next year, his senior season at Miami Central. Hopefully things are a little more stable for him, and he uses that to build as he gets to Penn State, because he was, I think, 170 pounds at one point at 6'5", with like 33+ inch arms. He's up to 185 now, so he's doing the work necessary. It's just, where is he from that mental perspective, which is a wild card, to that developmental perspective, which is a wild card, with all of that baked in potential?
Yep, there's no doubt about it. So
when you look, who are yours, by the way? Do you have any? Do you have any on the top of your mind?
No, I pretty much agree 100% with your list. I think that when you look at the way you're defining what these wild cards are, you pick the right guys out. So to me, it's just an interesting class, just simply because of the fact that you do have some other guys who could probably be on this list in terms of the four we went with here, if you really wanted to dive into it. So, which we will do on future shows, and of course you're doing right now at bluewhiteillustrated.com. But overall, T. Frank, I guess as we come down the home stretch here on this edition of BWI Live, I think we got to mostly everything in the chat. There was one question from Steven C. earlier that about he's going to the Wisconsin game on October 26th. He thought it was a definite night game. It's actually not at this point in time. Says, when will we know about more kick times for Penn State? I would not expect anytime soon. It looks like so at some point, the next one we're going to find out is the whiteout. That is the next one you're going to find out. And Penn State wants to get that out there, wants that to be solidified with its TV partners, with the Big Ten. So they're working through that, but that's the next kick time you're going to learn. And then I'm not really expecting to learn any more before the season begins. Now, could we get homecoming dialed in, for example? Yeah, possibly. So Fox currently listing that at 3:34 or 7:30, and I think that could also end up on a different network. So, we're keeping an eye out on that. We have a couple others in West Virginia, of course, will start at noon. But yeah, unlike in years past, everyone that's listening, the combination of new broadcast partners in the Big Ten is really kind of throwing things for a loop. And then when, you're trying to do not only the work of trying to integrate NBC and CBS, and obviously NBC was around last year and CBS to a degree, but now they're all full-timers in here with Fox. There's a lot more moving parts than there were in the past. So unfortunately, I would not get your hopes up to learn anything about the Wisconsin game anytime soon.
Yeah, and this is why you guys are so valuable, because my head's in the clouds thinking about the X's and O's and thinking about recruits and the personality of the class of 2025, which, if you actually think about it, means nothing. That thought means very little. And the stuff that actually affects fans, kick times, what's going on, the nature of how the game is going to feel and act, that you're so good at that stuff. So I'm glad that you have the pulse of that for everyone here on the BWI Live show and at bluewhiteillustrated.com.
Yep. No, absolutely. So I don't know if we have anything else to get to. T. Frank, final thoughts here. I want to point out that Steve Wiltfong has put in a new crystal ball at bluewhiteillustrated.com. The On3 vice president of transfer portal and recruiting has a new prediction log for Penn State. So I encourage you, hit the like button here and subscribe if you're on YouTube, or if you're on your podcast feed, please leave us a 5-star review if you're so inclined. We'd really appreciate it. But then get on over to bluewhiteillustrated.com, where you can sign up today. $1 for 2 months. You get all the stuff we've talked about today, premium info, much more behind the scenes than we can give you here. It's $1 for 2 months. That includes Steve Wiltfong's latest RPM for Penn State and Sean Fitz and Ryan Snyder's input on what it means. And if you're listening live, it's about 5/11 on June 26th. I think that if we've learned anything, T. Frank, tell me if I'm wrong, but if we've learned anything this week, I think it's that Penn State fans should be ready for something to possibly pop up at a moment's notice. because that's the way this next 2 weeks are going to go. And so if you're, if you're out there and you're looking to kill some more time to do it, depending on what you're up to, stay tuned, because I think that, as we have learned, the next 2 weeks, things can happen at any moment. So check out what's going on over at bluewhiteillustrated.com for the latest.
Yeah,
Any
and
final
we'll
thoughts, Steve Frank?
Nope, just we're going to be writing about recruiting a whole lot. I guess the one thing I would say is something weird is going to happen in 2 weeks. I'm going to take a vacation, and there's not going to be a show. I don't know the last time we did that. I'm terrified. Please be here when I get back. At the butt end of July, we're getting ready for Penn State football training camp. So I'm trusting everybody that I'm going to take a couple of days to go see the Pacific Ocean, and when I come back, you'll still be here. There's a certain amount of fear that we got in this good rhythm, and if I mess that up, you're going to just go to the wind. And I know the regulars will be here, but I love you guys, and I want you to be here when I get back. So that's the only thing. So in a couple of weeks, we won't have any shows because I'll be off. Unless, Greg, you're doing a great job hosting, unless you want to step in and the machine keeps running, but I'm not going to put that on you for sure.
Yeah, no, I think we'll figure something out between now and then. So stay tuned. We'll have, programming details closer to that time. But until then, that's Thomas Frank Carr. I'm Greg Pickel. The BWI Live show continues tomorrow when Ryan Snyder and Sean Fitz are back with a recruiting-focused update. And until then, we'll have you covered bluewhiteillustrated.com and on the YouTube channel here and your favorite podcast feeds. Talk to you next time.